In this video, we're going to talk about how to fix your tight hamstrings and a few things that you probably never heard before that's going to give you lasting results. Yo, what's up? It's Coach E here from Precision Movement, and today we're going to talk about how to fix tight hamstrings. So the hamstrings are a muscle group that are commonly tight. So many athletes, so many regular people have tight hamstrings, and they're trying to do things, they're trying to stretch, the typical static stretch where you stick your leg up on a chair and you kind of bend over and you stretch the hamstrings there. They're doing that, but you're not getting lasting relief. So why is that? So we're going to talk about 3 things that you need to know to fix your tight hamstrings for good. Okay, so before we get into that, quick little bit of anatomy. The hamstrings, they're made up of 3 different heads of the muscle. There's the biceps femoris, which is kind of on the lateral side, the outside, and then there's the semitendinosus and membranosus, which are more on the medial aspect here, okay? So the hamstring, it's a multi-joint muscle, so it crosses both the hip joint and the knee joint. So at the knee, the hamstrings create knee flexion, okay? And when the knee is flexed, they also rotate the tibia. The biceps femoris rotated laterally or externally, and the semitendinosus and membranosus rotated medially, okay? At the hip, the hamstrings contribute to hip extension, okay? So pushing the hip back. So why is that important? Well, that's important because why are the hamstrings tight in the first place? Now, one reason that the hamstrings are tight in the first place is because they're trying to pick up the slack from muscles, other muscles that aren't doing the job. And in this case, the muscles that are often not working properly in people are the glutes and the glute maximus, okay? The glute maximus contributes to hip extension. That's its primary role, is to extend the hip. And it's a big muscle and it's very powerful. But when we're sitting on our asses all day, okay, those muscles can go to sleep, they get weak, and they stop functioning properly. Something else has to pick up the slack, and that something else is the hamstrings. But the hamstrings, on the other hand, they're a very long muscle. Like you can see, it goes from the knee right up to my hip, ischial tuberosity right on the pelvis here. It's a long muscle. They're very skinny. They're not designed to do the same work from a structural perspective as the glute maximus, which is a short, really thick, strong muscle. Okay, it's built for power. So the hamstrings try to pick up the slack there. They can't do the job. They get overworked. They get damaged. They get sore. You can get tendinopathy going on, tendinosis, high hamstring problems right at the ischial tuberosity, at the sit bones. Okay, those are all symptoms that the hamstrings are doing too much and doing work that they're not suited for. So to fix that, you got to get the glutes working properly. Okay, so glute maximus exercises, you start off very simple with hip bridges, you know, just firing up the glutes, making sure they're active, squeeze the glutes. And one trick you can apply to this to get the hamstrings out of this movement is think about kicking the floor that way. Your feet aren't going to move, but I'm sliding my feet that way to fire up the quads in knee extension, and that'll shut the hamstrings off a little bit so you can focus more of this hip extension movement on the glutes. Okay, so before you do any exercises, squats, deadlifts, lunges, any of that stuff, get the glutes firing up, shut off the hamstrings, and that'll help to reprogram your neuromuscular system so that the glutes start to do what they're supposed to do and the hamstrings do less of that hip extension movement. Okay, so that's part 1. The glutes aren't working properly. Part 2 is, this is for people and athletes, generally younger athletes or more natural athletes who are very powerful and explosive. They can run really fast, they can sprint super fast, but they haven't developed their hamstring strength sufficient to handle all the forces that go on when you're sprinting. So the hamstrings, when you're running, they decelerate the foot or the lower leg from going forward, and then they help to pull yourself forward when you're sprinting, okay? If you're really powerful and you're running really fast, maybe you don't have the speed to, or the hamstring strength and the speed and the reaction time to control that movement, the deceleration movement, okay? The other part of this running and sprinting sports, you see a lot of hamstring problems there. The other time that the hamstrings contribute to that is in cutting and rotation. Because remember I said, when the knees are flexed, the hamstrings contribute to lower leg rotation. Okay, so if you're running and cutting, you need that type of movement. If you're a boxer and you're throwing and you're rotating, you need that type of movement, that type of control at the knee joint from the hamstrings. So if they're not working properly and they're not strong enough, they can end up getting strained. Okay, so those are some contributing factors to hamstring problems and ultimately hamstring tightness. So if the hamstrings, if they've been tight or if they're getting strained over and over and damaged, then you need to restore proper muscle tissue quality. Okay, so one way to do that, you got a lacrosse ball here, you sit on something, and this technique I call active self-myofascial release. So if you've ever heard of active release techniques from physiotherapists or chiropractors, this is along those same lines, the same philosophy and theories behind it, okay? So what you want to do is stick the lacrosse ball somewhere under your hamstring, hitting the hamstrings. Start with your knee flexed, and then I'm going to put my pressure, put the weight on it, and then I'm going to slide my butt forward as I extend the knee, okay? Went off the edge there a little bit. And then you hit another area and you do the same thing. Slide forward as you extend the knee. What this is doing is, it's basically with the ball, you're locking down the tissue, and then as you slide, you're ripping the tissue, you're releasing the tissue, and then as you extend the knee, you're further releasing that tissue because you're contracting the quads through reciprocal inhibition. The hamstrings relax a little bit so you can get deeper into that tissue and release it even better than if you're just to do like a passive massage, okay? So that's why it's a little more effective to put the pressure on and actively lengthen the muscle as you release the tissue, okay? So that's the active self-myofascial release. So far we've covered two things that you need to do. You need to get the glutes working properly so the hamstrings don't compensate and overwork, because you'll never get out of tight hamstrings if they're always constantly working and tightening up because they're getting damaged. Just like if you're training your biceps and you rip them so hard, they get really sore, they kind of tighten up, you walk like this. Same thing happens with the hamstrings, okay? Part two is to use some kind of tool. Go to a therapist if you want, but you can do this to release the tissue, okay? Release the muscles, the adhesions, scar tissue, anything like that that might be there, okay? Once you've done that stuff, then it's time to increase the length of the hamstring. Now that's where static stretching comes into play, but static stretching, research has shown, not as effective as mobility exercises, and definitely not active mobility exercises, I should say, and definitely not as effective as the technique I'm going to show you here today. So here, you might have heard of P&F stretching before. It involves contracting muscles on both sides of the joint. So here I'm stretching the hamstrings. So what I want to do is I want to contract both my hamstrings and my quads to deepen the stretch and to also reprogram the neuromuscular system to say, hey, I've got strength at this range of motion, let me keep it. That's one of the problems with static stretching is you stretch out, you get loose, you gain range, but you haven't built up the strength there. So your neuromuscular system, your brain is like, okay, you're not strong at this range, I'm just going to tighten you back up because that's unstable. That's dangerous to have range of motion without any strength or control at that range. Okay, so it's very simple. All you do is get into your whatever hamstring stretch you're doing. Okay, this is the single leg up on a chair or a box. So here I've got a little bit of a stretch going. So my first move is to push down and to think of flexing my knee to fire up those hamstrings. So hip extension, knee flexion, make sure the hammies are fired up. Okay, do that for about 5 seconds, a good strong contraction, maybe 80%, and then relax, and then deepen myself into the stretch. Breathe. Then part two is I'm here, and I actively flex the hip and extend the knee. So fire up those quads, fire up the hip flexors, hold it for 5 seconds, and then relax and go deeper into the stretch again, okay? Breathing the whole time, relaxed, and then you repeat that cycle for 2 to 3 times per leg, okay? So there you're going to build some strength in both the muscles that bring you into the range of motion, which are the hip flexors and the quads, and the muscles that will get you out of that range of motion, which are the hamstrings and the glutes. And that's how you quickly reprogram the neuromuscular system to accept this new range of motion. Okay, so that's a technique that you can use to build what I call range of control. And that's what's most important to active people, athletes, people who are using their bodies and need not just the flexibility, but the mobility, the strength to get into, stabilize, and out of that range of motion. All right, so there you have 3 things you need to do to fix your tight hamstrings. Hopefully that's opened your eyes a little bit to some things that you may have been missing if you've been trying to stretch your hamstrings, but you haven't had any success. And if you found this beneficial, useful, and you put it to work for you and you're like, oh, hey, this is working awesome, I suggest you check out the hip flexibility solution at precisionmovement.coach/hip-flexibility-solution. I'll throw a link at the end of this video, but check that out because we're going to hit up all the muscles of the hips, hamstrings, quads, hip flexors, adductors, all that stuff, loosen them up, but also build that range of control, build that strength and stability so you can use it in your everyday movements and everyday life. All right, so thanks for watching. My name's Eric. You were watching Precision Movement at Work, and I'll see you soon. Peace.